Hey guys, Mr. Hyatt here. This is part 3 of the AP Biology Chapter 45 lecture. Picking up here with thyroid gland and thyroid hormones. Thyroid is going to be really involved in metabolism and in growth and development. Often people that have dysfunctional thyroid glands have trouble controlling their weight. So they have trouble both breaking down nutrients, and they have trouble with controlling their development. So they tend to get bigger and bigger and bigger. It produces two hormones, both contain iodine, T3 and thyroxine. I'm not going to try to pronounce T3. I guess I will. Triiodothyronine. Triiodothyronine. And thyroxine. Sorry. So thyroid hormones stimulate metabolism and influence development and maturation. Hyperthyroidism. Hyper, you should see as too much. Hypo, it should be too little. Hyperthyroidism is going to cause too much thyroid hormone to be in our system. That's going to cause us to have a high body temperature. It's going to cause us to lose weight. We're going to have high blood pressure, and we're going to be irritable. Graves' disease is an example of hyperthyroidism. I think someone, maybe Isaiah, is doing Graves' disease. I think someone in our class is doing Graves' disease. Hypothyroidism is going to be low levels of thyroid hormones. It's going to cause weight gain, lethargy, like laziness. Not really laziness, just like slothiness, and intolerance to cold. Weirdly enough, both my mom and my dog have hypothyroidism, and they both take thyroxine to treat their hypothyroidism. Strange, but definitely conserved across kingdoms there. Not across kingdoms, but across families. We're all animals. So iodine and thyroid function, we need dietary iodine because it's part of those two thyroid hormones. And then we can use radioactive labeled iodine to help detect those thyroid problems. So a lot of times, if you're trying to diagnose if you have a thyroid issue, they'll have you take radio labeled iodine, and you can see that something's going on here, a high level of iodine uptake there. So yeah, that's kind of that. Don't know why that slide was so skinny, but it was. Parathyroid hormone and vitamin D. Remember, I talked about vitamin D in class. Calcium levels are a very common test question, so make sure you tune in and turn your brain on here. Oh, I said that on the slide. So there are two antagonistic hormones that regulate the homeostasis of calcium in the blood, specifically to mammals. You got parathyroid hormone and calcitonin. So this is going to be a lot like blood sugar levels, but it's a different example of negative feedback. So in this case, our stimulus is falling blood calcium levels. So that's the stimulus. The parathyroid gland is going to receive that message and is going to do a whole lot with it. That PTH, that's the parathyroid hormone, is going to be released. And in the kidneys, when they receive it, they're going to basically activate vitamin D. That's going to increase the calcium uptake in intestine. It's also going to stimulate calcium release from bones, and that's going to cause the blood calcium levels to rise, which maintains our homeostasis. Essentially, this just talks through the same thing I just said. So read through that, make sure you understand how the two interact and how they have that antagonistic relationship to maintain homeostasis. Adrenal hormones are going to be responses to stress. They're going to be created in part of two glands, the inner portion, the outer portion. The medulla is the inner portion, and the cortex is the outer portion. In the medulla, so the inner portion, we're going to get adrenaline and noradrenaline, or norepinephrine. So epinephrine is adrenaline, norepinephrine is noradrenaline. They're just different naming systems. So they're members of a class of compounds called catecholamines. I mispronounced that one a lot, so I had to say it slowly. They're basically, the stimulus is going to be stress, and they're going to mediate the fight or flight responses. So epinephrine and norepinephrine trigger the release of glucose. Again, for that fight or flight energy, it's going to increase oxygen delivery to body cells. to improve muscle function, to basically think back to respiration. We need more energy, so we need to get oxygen to, especially the muscular tissue, so that they can do electron transport and get as much energy as possible. We're also going to direct blood toward the heart, brain, and skeletal muscles and away from the skin, digestive system, and kidneys. Again, fight or flight. You don't necessarily care if you can digest your last meal if you can keep it from being your last meal. So again, they are in response to nervous signals, nerve inputs from the hypothalamus. Remember, hypothalamus is that nexus of nerve and endocrine system. This picture kind of shows both short-term responses and long-term responses. See those glucocorticoids? You see those a ton in commercials. And then these are the things that we talked through. So this picture, I would be familiar with it. This part over here, definitely make sure you understand that whole process. The long-term stress response, I would say we should be able to discuss this, not necessarily explain it. So think about our active words and what those mean in terms of how detailed our knowledge needs to be. Just a zoomed in version, and then the summary of the short term that we need to be really, really, really familiar with. The adrenal cortex, which again is the outside of the adrenal gland, they're going to release those corticosteroids in response to stress. So that's the glucocorticoids that I talked about, and mineral corticoids. On that last slide, that's our long-term stress response. You see what the two things do. Obviously, by the way that I'm framing these, I'm not emphasizing these as much on the test in my unit test. The AP test writers may be different. They may see the long-term effects being more important. So just make sure you're familiar with them. Nothing's life-altering there. But things like cortisol are going to influence the glucose metabolism and the immune system, whereas aldosterone, they're going to affect salt and mineral water balances. So things like minerals, that's going to relate to glucose metabolism. Shocking. We're also going to produce small amounts of steroid hormones that function as sex hormones in the adrenal cortex. Excuse me. Moving on to gonadal sex hormones. Gonads, testes, and ovaries both are going to produce all three are going to produce most of the sex hormones, and androgens, estrogens, and progestins. All three sex hormones are found in both males and females, but in different amounts. So some people out there think guys have testosterone, girls have estrogen, and they're mutually exclusive. They're not. They're absolutely not. Testes in males are going to primarily synthesize the androgens, which is for the most part going to be testosterone. There are a few other androgens. They're going to stimulate the development and maintenance of the male reproductive system. Testosterone also causes an increase in muscle and bone mass, and it's often taken as a supplement to cause muscle growth. So like a performance-enhancing drug, basically. And so if you're taking testosterone, then you're going to change your internal homeostasis. That's going to have lots of systemic effects. This is a hormone. It deals with every cell in the body. We're not talking about a targeted communication system where we're just saying muscle cells, you get this testosterone, but nerve cells and brain cells, you guys don't get it. We're not able to do that. In females, of course, estrogen is going to be much more prevalent in females. Testosterone is going to be lower, but not zero. Estrogens, and most importantly, estradiol, which is the type of estrogen that we actually use in our bodies, are responsible for the female reproductive system and development of female secondary sex characteristics. So all the changes that females go through in puberty, breast development, their hips widening, all those types of things that happen in puberty. In mammals, the progestins like progesterone are involved with preparing and maintaining the uterus. That's one that lots of women have trouble with their progesterone levels if they have trouble getting pregnant. Could mean the uterus is not properly maintained. It could mean that the pH is off in the uterus or even in the vagina itself. But progesterone is largely involved with maintaining the uterus. It's common for women to have to take progesterone supplements during pregnancy. Synthesis of the sex hormones controlled by FSH, and LH, which are luteinizing hormone, and I can't remember what FSH stands for. But that all comes from the anterior pituitary. So make these connections as you work through this stuff. Melatonin, you might see, I can't remember what the name of the prescription is. There's a commercial right now that talks about folks that are blind and how they have a hard time telling day from night. Because to them, dark, there's no such thing as light and dark. It's all dark. So in those of us that can see, light and dark cycles are going to control the release of melatonin. Melatonin relates to biological rhythms associated with reproduction. So, like, your monthly cycle would be thrown off if you didn't have melatonin. Males also have monthly cycles. Ours aren't accompanied by the same things that female cycles are, but we have monthly cycles that are thrown off if we don't have melatonin. Also influences our mood, influences a lot of stuff. Again, hormones do a ton. So in summary, distinguish between those terms, describe the evidence that steroid hormones have intracellular while water-soluble have to stay at the surface, so steroids can diffuse through. How do we know that? What's the evidence? Explain how the antagonistic hormones, insulin and glucagon, regulate glucose metabolism, so positive, negative feedback there. Distinguish between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. We'll get there if you're not there already. Explain how the hypothalamus and the pituitary interact. I talked about those two separately. I briefly talked about how they interact, so make sure that makes sense. If it doesn't, ask questions. Explain the role of tropic and non-tropic hormones in our bodies. And then here are the big glands that we need to know. Basically, I'm asking you to summarize those tables just for these glands. Know what hormones they produce and know basically what those hormones do. Remember that I said focus on thyroxine. Every time you see thyroxine, write it down and list whatever the book or whatever I'm talking about, whatever video you're watching. If you hear the word thyroxine, pay attention and learn about it.